Hello and welcome to Your Money, Their Hands. And this week we're making a return to Jupiter to speak to the manager of the Jupiter Ecology Fund, Charlie Thomas. Charlie, since we last met, we've had the G20 conference in London, and looking forward, we've got the International Climate Change in Copenhagen, where something at least meaningful might take place. What's that done for you as an investment manager and the companies you look at?
We're at a very interesting stage, actually, with regards to that question, in that we've got the conference, a very important conference, coming in the next 2 months or so. What we have now is got that prelim period where there's a lot of shuffling around in terms of where countries are positioning themselves. We've seen some proactive positioning from the Chinese and India, for example. The US looks very keen, but it seems to be rather stuck in the mud at the moment with internal politics, which might hold back some of the negotiations. I think overall we have to be cautious on the outcome. I think there's going to be a lot of media attention to it, but really from our perspective, from an investment perspective, it's understanding what's going on behind the scenes and what are the long-term impacts that could happen in the portfolio as a result of that, and of which we actually feel very encouraged by.
Looking at some of the companies you invest in, and indeed the sectors, what sort of new technology do you think is offering perhaps the chance of the best returns for the future?
We haven't seen any big transformational technology moves. At the moment, it's still very much about the existing technologies and improve them. To give you a tangible example, wind power, for example, which has been around a lot of the time, is still moving down the cost curve. In fact, if you look at the cost of wind power generation over the last 20 years, it's come down nearly 80%. If you look to other technologies such as solar, where it is less advanced and less cost efficient, we actually see the technology move and the move down the cost curve actually happening at a much more accelerated rate than perhaps we had even anticipated.
Do you think, you mentioned wind there, I know you're quite keen on Vestas, which is obviously one of the world's largest makers of wind turbines. We've always been told that this is, you mentioned the cost there, but are they as effective in terms of what they actually will contribute to the grid at the end of the day as an alternative source of energy?
It's a very good point. I think there's a lot of sometimes misunderstanding about the issue. Undoubtedly, it is the most mature, and therefore, and also very important to it, it is also allows more power to come onto the grid than any other alternative energy at the moment. So I anticipate it to be an increasing part of the mix. We've got to remember the UK only has around about 3% of all electricity power generation coming from renewables. So there's actually an awfully large opportunity to increase that, perhaps close to 10, perhaps close to 12%, of which the bulk of that energy, we believe, is going to be the wind sector.
But as we've mentioned, possibly the momentum not perhaps as great as or many of your investors would like. But can you see it to the point where we're looking at a time horizon of even 5 years where this is mating? I mean, you mentioned 3%. Is this going to be really meaningful change, do you think?
We do, and I think it happens in two ways. One, I think the cost of energy for wind energy will continue to come down. I think we've also got to look at the other scenario, and that is in a world where we're putting greater constraints on how much CO2 can be emitted, there will be increasing emphasis on the price of carbon, which could easily push up conventional power costs to the point where they become much more in equilibrium. Now, it doesn't take away some of the very technical issues about wind and whether wind is blowing at any one point, but if you look across the whole national grid, then what you tend to find is it does balance out. So whilst it may not be windy in the north, it may well be windy in the south. And so you do get a natural balance ebbing and flowing. Also, what we are going to find, and there's an awful lot of interest at the moment, is in terms of the grid and how smart the electricity grid can be in the future, which could help to cope with the increased level of alternative energies.
And does that mean that people who typically invest in green and environmental issues will actually be able to contribute, as they do in some small way now, to the grid? I mean, is that becoming much more likely to happen?
I think that is the case. I mean, to give you one example in case, and it's not necessarily totally representative, but last year, at one point during the windy season in Spain, nearly 40% of the electricity at one point was generated by wind turbines.
So you've got to be patient, it seems to me. I mean, what would you say to an investor? What sort of time horizon are you looking at now for, say, longer-term capital growth?
I think we're still very positive. I think what we've got at the moment is that we are still in a position where some of the financing for wind turbine projects, for example, is slow. It is still very much there, but it is slow. There is clear evidence that is beginning to accelerate, alongside a lot of the stimulus packages which have been created around the world over the last year. If you aggregate that amount of money around the world, we're looking at a pot of around about $500 billion to be spent in this sort of areas and some of the green technology areas, which is a huge, huge impetus to the opportunities in our space, the like of which, to be honest, we've never seen before.
Charlie, thank you very much indeed. And that was Charlie Thomas, the manager of Jupiter's Ecology Fund. And that's it for this week, but don't forget to keep up to date with all the latest news and views online and, of course, in the Saturday and Sunday papers. Thank you for watching, and please do join us again next time.